Atheism during the Greek classical period. I'm going to continue today my little foray into the classical Greek period, kind of mini-series, if you like, on classical Greek thought. And I thought today it might be interesting to look at the rise of the idea of atheism in the ancient Greek world. Let's start with a guy called Critius, who was a student of Socrates, about 10 years his junior. Critius is an interlocutor in two of Plato's Socratic dialogues. He's better known for some of his questionable political activities than for his writing, and not much of his writing has actually survived other than in quotations by later authors, and the authorship of some of these fragments is occasionally disputed. Nevertheless, in the play Sisyphus, which is generally attributed to him, Critias describes the invention both of law and the gods as being by a clever and wise man who wished to deceive and control the rest of humanity through fear of supernatural powers. He believed religion could play an important role in achieving obedience to the state, but there was no objective truth to it. These ideas sound very Machiavellian, or perhaps we should say that Machiavelli's views sound very Critian. Machiavelli argued that religion would be a powerful tool for rulers to control the populace. He believed that religion fosters moral behaviour, unity and loyalty, which in turn promote political stability. Leaders should support religious practices that encourage obedience and discourage dissent, regardless of whether the religion is true or not. And this sounds very similar to what appear to be Critius's views. Around the same time, another philosopher called Protagoras, who was a prominent sophist, reportedly wrote in a lost work called On the Gods, "Concerning the gods, I have no means of knowing whether they exist or not, nor of what sort they may be, because of the obscurity of the subject and the brevity of human life." Many of his works were apparently later destroyed. And so there was often a violent reaction against agnostic or atheistic authors. I suspect, though, that this was for political reasons rather than for philosophical or religious reasons. Whether the gods were invented, as Critius claimed, or not, they certainly served a useful purpose in controlling the people. Spreading atheism would be regarded as a subversive activity. Democratus, again around the same time, famous for coming up with the idea that the whole universe was made up of atoms, including the soul. Well, writing at around the same time as these other philosophers, while he didn't express atheism, like Xenophanes of Colophon, who lived a century earlier, he attempted to understand the world through material causes and reason, rather than by divine intervention. He was, I think you could say, a practical atheist, in the sense that he made the gods irrelevant, at least as far as the natural world was concerned. As far as I can tell, he also developed a very extensive ethical framework without any appeal to the gods or to divine law. Writing about a century later, Epicurus was not an atheist, but as far as he was concerned, the gods existed, but they were indifferent to human concerns. They lived in perfect tranquility and were neither involved in the world nor interested in human behaviour. Epicurus rejected the idea that gods punish or reward people, so he denied the traditional role of the gods in Greek religion as moral enforcers. His ideas also minimized the need to fear the gods, which was central to Greek religious practice. So again, this is a kind of practical atheism, and I'm sure would have been frowned upon by those in power. It's worth noting that all atheism is in fact relative to the gods being rejected. And it's one reason why I really don't choose to call myself an atheist, because I don't want to be defined in terms of one particular thing that I happen to be rejecting, whether it's the Christian God or even gods in general. I don't believe in many things, like fairies and unicorns, for example, but I don't want to be defined in those negative terms. That aside, the atheism or practical atheism of many of these thinkers was actually a rejection of the gods of the Greek pantheon. If these gods were not entirely rejected, they were exiled to a realm beyond the natural world, and they had no role in or interaction with the natural world or with human beings. Philosophers such as Plato and Aristotle developed a much more abstract and sophisticated view of the divine, which I would argue is largely the idea adopted by Christianity later. God in himself, that is, although that view is tempered by the whole Jesus narrative. But the God that Aquinas proves, for example, in his Summa Theologica, is very much the God of Aristotle rather than the God of the Bible. Now, I have no way of knowing whether these philosophers that I've mentioned back in those days, who rejected the popular Greek gods, would also have rejected the more nuanced views of Plato and Aristotle. Many of them were writing before both of these philosophers, so we have no way of knowing. Epicurus, however, was writing later, and he rejected the idea that the gods or any divine power at all was involved with the world. And this appears to be a rejection of the ideas of Plato and Aristotle, who, despite this more elevated view of the divine, did believe that the divine interacted with the world and with human beings. So even though Epicurus doesn't name Plato and Aristotle specifically, it does seem that he is rejecting their views too. But whatever the upper echelons of philosophy might have been saying about the gods, this had little impact on the beliefs of the general population. There were strong political motivations for preventing these atheistic views from being widely spread, because the powers that be recognized the truth of Critius's words, later echoed by Machiavelli, and even in a slightly different way by Karl Marx. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. And as such, as both Critius and Machiavelli recognized, religion can be a very useful tool for controlling the general population, even if those pesky philosophers can't always be controlled.